round 2, principals versus principals. This matchup, we have Mrs. Hayes, our school's vice principal, going up against Jonas, a 5th grader. Mrs. Hayes is playing the white pieces. Mr. Jonas is playing the black pieces. Miss Hayes, this was her first game, allegedly, that she had ever played chess. I told her, though, to watch the piece movement video so she'd have a fair shot. And I told her weeks in advance, and I don't think she did it. So that's her own fault if she didn't know the piece movement. But she needs to do her homework and study. What's she doing, running a school a day or something? But she's an educated lady. She has her a degree from Stan State and a master's degree from the Teachers College. Obviously, if you're an administrator, you got those administrator credentials. But Jonas went to school at the old Swindlers Academy, and he knows his opening principles. So this should be a pretty good matchup. Mrs. Hayes opens up with D4, a queen's pawn game. Solid opening, Mrs. Hayes. I think those first couple minutes of that video paid off. Jonas responds in kind with D5. Pretty good start so far. We got some book moves. Mrs. Hayes defends her pawn a little shifty. Going right here to C4. This is the Queen's Gambit. I'm not a huge fan of this pawn move, but this is her first time playing, so I shouldn't be too mean. Sorry, Mrs. Hayes. Jonas develops his piece, getting his minors out, putting some pressure on this pawn. Mrs. Hayes starts to develop her pieces, gets her bishop out into the action. Not too centralized, though. And Mr. Jonas gets his piece into the party. Good job, Jonas. And then we make this sketchy move right here. So I don't know what this move is trying to accomplish. Maybe trying to get a little pathway for our bishop. But it really just hangs this pawn. So that's a free cookie right there. And Jonas knows how to gobble him up. And so he ate that free cookie. Good job, Jonas. Keeping an eye out. Mrs. Hayes made this move. And then Jonas retreats his knight. Just gets a little more centralized across from intermediate lines. Mrs. Hayes, now she's like, oh, that's how a knight works. So she gets her knight out into the action. Good start. A good move. And her structure is not terrible right now. She's just down one little pawn, but she's looking okay. Has a nice little pawn structure here. She has 2 minors out. And Jonas is occupying the center, just like Mrs. Hayes, and he has his pieces out. He lost a little tempo gobbling up that pawn, but still looking pretty good for both parties. Jonas gets his bishop out, and Mrs. Hayes makes this move, kind of offering a bishop trade right here. So if Jonas takes, Mrs. Hayes takes, even material, and Mrs. Hayes would have lost her right to castle. So not a bad move, not a bad exchange if you're Jonas. But Jonas decided to back up his pawn right here. And Mrs. Hayes pushes her pawn. So now this is just, again, a free pawn. Or is it? So if Jonas takes, then Mrs. Hayes takes and gets a big free cookie. So that's kind of a poison pawn. Is there any other way? Oh, there, of course. No, it's not a poison pawn. So Jonas could just gobble up that way. That's a free cookie. So free cookie. Just took me a second for some reason. But Jonas didn't see the free cookie. He just retreated his knight. And then Miss Hayes plays this kind of C4 explosive move, creating some tension here, some tension here, some tension here. A lot of tension on the board. And here's, no, it's not too free. Okay, a lot of tension. So Jonas gets his bishop on G2, preparing to castle. A little fianchetto here. Mrs. Hayes moves her bishop to G4. I don't know what we're thinking here. I think, honestly, she thought that you jumped like checkers, and that's how you captured. So you can't really blame her. But now this piece is just hanging. There's no protector here. So Jonas gobbles up, and then Miss Hayes was like, oh, that's how you capture pieces. So she learned a lesson, unfortunately. Now Jonas is up by 4 points of material. Mrs. Hayes comes out, moving her knight around. And Jonas gobbles up this free cookie. Boom. No protector. That's just, you might as well take it. Now Jonas is up by 5 points. Okay. We still got a castle. but Mrs. Hayes has a lot of unmoved pieces. So does Jonas, though. But he's going to castle soon, I'm sure. Free cookie for Mrs. Hayes. But it's really more of an exchange of cookies because Jonas recaptures there. So still up by 5. Mrs. Hayes just moves her pawn out. I don't know. Makes sense. It's just an easy piece to understand how to move, I think. And then Jonas made this error. So I think his idea was, I'm just going to come in and take this piece, and Mrs. Hayes won't notice and won't capture at all, which it was worth the shot, to be honest. But Mrs. Hayes said, no, I should be able to recapture, and she does. I would have probably taken with my queen here, though, so you don't have a messed up pawn structure, but I think that's the least of our worries. So Jonas captures the free cookie, attacking the rook. Mrs. Hayes should probably move her rook out of the way unless she wants to lose it, but she moves this pawn instead. And Jonas captures. Free rook now. Jonas is up by 8 points. Mrs. Hayes, she likes those pawn moves. Moves her pawn again. That's another free pawn. Jonas should just gabagool. Yeah, his pawns are doubled, but I'm sure you could trade this pawn for the e-pawn eventually. I guess Mrs. Hayes could just recapture it there, but that's not what happened. Mrs. Hayes pushed her pawn. Jonas moved his knight, maybe freeing up his queen to gobble that piece, pawn. Mrs. Hayes takes, but kind of a shifty take because she'll be trading a pawn for a knight. So Jonas takes. Mrs. Hayes pushes her pawn. Right now, her plan is just to get this pawn to right here. That's her one goal. She wants to promote that to a queen. That's her mission. I don't know. So Jonas pushes. Again, this is another free pawn, though. So Jonas wanted to just take. There's no one here to dispute that. That's another free cookie right there. And then Mrs. Hayes puts Jonas in check. But none of us noticed that this was check, and we just kept playing. And in the real game, Jonas moved his bishop to g6, but on the analysis board, it doesn't let you do that because it's an illegal move. But we didn't see this, so we're going to pretend like it was a legal game. So this didn't actually happen. Jonas didn't actually move his king here. He moved his bishop here to g6. So this was the actual position right here of the game. And then on the next move, Mrs. Hayes promoted the pawn. But I'll make an in-between move here just so I can get the pieces back. So again, this rook should be here and this king should be here, but it's all legal. So, and then Mrs. Hayes promoted, and again, the king was here, and Jonas took with his rook. Boom. And then Mrs. Hayes was really sad because she worked so hard to get that queen over there. So I'm going to move our rooks back and our king back. So this was the official position after all that illegal moves happened. So we're just going to pretend like it didn't happen, though. And it's probably my fault because I was recording the game and I didn't call it out. So we all missed it. What are you going to do? All right. Mrs. Hayes responds by taking what looks like a free cookie right here, right? That's a free cookie, but it's not because the bishop is guarding right there. So Jonas sees that and he takes. Good stuff. So now Jonas is up by 15 points. Pretty big lead right now. And he hasn't really gotten any of these major pieces in the game. He's just been doing a lot of damage with his minor pieces. So good job, Jonas. All right. Mrs. Hayes gets her bishop out in the action. And Jonas is just trading down. Eliminating material. You want to kind of simplify because you're up by 15 points. So if you take away all their pieces, you're going to be up by 15 points. Jonas moves his knight out of the way. Yeah, Mrs. Hayes, I think she just figured, like, I know how to use this bishop, so I'm going to move it around a lot. But this is a super sketch, spot right there. That's a free cookie. But Jonas didn't see it. He moved his knight away. Again, Mrs. Hayes just likes that bishop, I guess. Is that a free cookie? No, it's not a free cookie because our queen is defending. So Jonas does get a free cookie there. Mrs. Hayes makes another bishop move because, again, I think she's just comfortable with that bishop. Jonas pulls out his queen. We got a lot of pressure here. So that's pawn's going to lose it. Mrs. Hayes creating some threats over here. Jonas gobbles up that free cookie. And yeah, this bishop is threatening here, but it's protected right there. Boom, doesn't matter. Whew, so Miss Hayes moves her bishop again for like the 5th time. And now we have queens staring at each other. Jonas should have probably traded there. He's up by 17 pieces. He might as well get that queen off the board and use his powerhouse back here just to take out Mrs. Hayes. But he likes his queen, so he moved it out of the way. Mrs. Hayes with another bishop move. Now we have check. And queen moves to block. Now we have a nice exchange of queens. Very simplified game. Jonas is up by 18 points of material, and this should be a cakewalk for him. So Jonas getting his bishop into position. Mrs. Hayes just moving. We got check from Jonas. And now here's another free piece. And Mrs. Hayes is really just a sitting duck right now. But Jonas doesn't take. He just kind of he boxes her in. So Mrs. Hayes can't really move her king anywhere but up and down. And I mean, I guess this piece isn't really threatening a whole lot. Maybe she can gobble up this pawn. So she moves her king again. Now Jonas gobbles up that piece. And this should be a cakewalk. Jonas is up by 21 points. And Mrs. Hayes is just trotting up and down this e-file. And Jonas puts her in check. She retreats. Check again. She probably should have just taken that pawn. That's a free cookie. But she didn't see that. So she moved over there. And then Jonas moves his rook down. I think he's trying to get it over here. And then he eventually wants to checkmate that way. I just hit all the buttons I wasn't supposed to hit. Okay, here we are. So Mrs. Hayes moves her king away. Jonas moves his rook. Good. And this is where it starts to get a little shifty. So right now, there's very few places that this king can go. He can go here and here. That's it right now. So she chooses one of her spots that is safe to go to. And poor Jonas. He moves his rook right here. And this is a bad move because the king can't go here because of the pawn. King can't go here or here because of the rook. The king can't capture because that rook is protected, and the king can't move here because of the rook. But unfortunately for Jonas, this king is not threatened. So this is a stalemate. So Jonas was up by 21 points. But he accidentally stalemated her. So it was kind of a runaway game, but it ended up a draw. And you can't fault Jonas too much because we really haven't studied in-game material or in-game strategies. But overall, pretty good game. Jonas fought really hard, and he was really friendly. He was a good competitor. And Miss Hayes was a good sport. So thank you to Miss Hayes, and game well played. All right. I'll catch you swindlers later.